before tanks rolled through Red Square, before Stalin's laboratories went silent behind iron doors, before the word parapsychology even existed. There was a dream, not just of science or power or utopia, but of something far older and stranger. The belief that human consciousness was not bound by the body. In the late 19th century, as Tsarist Russia teetered on the edge of upheaval, a quiet revolution stirred, not in politics or war, but in philosophy. Among its prophets stood Nikolai Fedorov, a librarian by profession and a mystic by temperament. Fedorov envisioned a radical project for the human race, one so vast it dwarfed even Marxist dreams of global revolution. The common task, he wrote, is the resurrection of the dead, not by miracles, but by science. Fedorov believed that technology would one day reverse death, reclaim the past, and unify all of human history into one living present. He wasn't fantasizing about zombies or afterlife myths. No, he imagined cosmic resurrection, a future where physics, morality, and consciousness merged into a new evolutionary force. He became the spiritual godfather of Russian cosmism, a school of thought that saw the human soul as an active force in shaping the universe. And in doing so, he laid the philosophical foundations for a kind of parapsychology before the word had even been coined. While Fedorov looked to the stars, another figure was stirring the shadows, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Born in 1831 to Russian nobility, she would become one of the most enigmatic and controversial spiritual thinkers of the century. After traveling through Tibet, India, Egypt, and Europe, Blavatsky returned with a storm of ideas: karma, astral planes, reincarnation, and ancient wisdom hidden beneath the surface of all religions. Her movement, Theosophy, claimed that human beings were multidimensional creatures with access to higher planes of consciousness through meditation, trance, and occult practice. She believed that psychic abilities weren't supernatural. They were natural powers long forgotten. While she spent much of her life abroad, her Russian origins rooted her deeply in the mystical soil of Eastern Orthodoxy, shamanic folklore, and Slavic spiritualism. In salons and secret societies, from St. Petersburg to Paris, her ideas merged with early scientific speculation, creating a new hybrid language of spirituality and science. Her two figures, Fedorov and Blavatsky, stood at opposite ends of a strange spectrum. One a philosopher of resurrection and space colonization, the other a mystic of invisible worlds and cosmic spirits. But together, they formed the intellectual prelude to what would become Russia's long and haunted entanglement with the paranormal, a tradition that would eventually draw the attention of KGB generals, nuclear physicists, and military strategists looking for the limits of the human mind. Before the Soviet mind labs, before the Cold War race for psychic weapons, there was a belief seeded in the soil of Tsarist Russia that the human spirit might be more than biology, and that consciousness itself might be a force yet unknown to science. Moscow, 1920s. A new world was being born. The Tsar was gone. Lenin ruled. Science, not God, was the new prophet of the people. Marxist ideology had little room for mysticism. Religion was banned, churches shuttered, and talk of the soul reduced to superstition. And yet, behind closed laboratory doors, another kind of experiment quietly took root. In a Spartan lab in Leningrad, a young physiologist named Leonid Vasilyev was conducting studies that should have been impossible, at least by Soviet standards. Vasilyev wasn't a mystic. He was a materialist to the bone, a devout believer in Pavlovian science, neurons, and measurable inputs. But he was also convinced that something strange lingered at the edges of consciousness. And so, with cautious state approval, he began to explore a forbidden frontier: telepathy. Under Vasiliev's guidance, researchers conducted controlled experiments in which a sender concentrated on an image or thought, while hundreds of kilometers away, a receiver attempted to draw or describe it. One test sent telepathic signals from Leningrad to Sevastopol, over 1,200 kilometers apart. When the data came in, some results were stunning. Sketches matched, descriptions lined up. It wasn't conclusive, but it was far beyond chance. We are observing a biological form of radio, Vasiliev speculated. A kind of wave-based transmission through unknown fields. He was desperate to fit the paranormal into Marxist orthodoxy, framing ESP as a natural phenomenon, not a spiritual one. Vasiliev's papers spoke of biofields, mental radiations, and the search for the carrier wave of telepathic thought. He partnered with physicists and neurologists, testing shielding, Faraday cages, and isolation chambers. At times, the experiments felt like something from a Cold War spy novel, a blend of neuroscience, physics, and psychic espionage. While Western researchers were being mocked in universities, Vasiliev was receiving classified funding and military interest. Because if thought could travel, then maybe commands could too. Still, this work was risky. Too much talk of mind powers could land a scientist in the gulag. So Vasiliev never used the word soul. He never spoke of ghosts or spirits. Instead, he built a careful scaffolding of materialist terminology, psychotronics, mental energy, neurotelemetry. It was science, but whispered science, a state-sanctioned flirtation with the impossible. By the 1950s, Vasiliev's experiments would influence secret programs across the Soviet military, including alleged attempts at remote viewing, psychic influence, and ESP-based reconnaissance. But it all began here, in a Leningrad lab, under the blinking lights of a voltmeter, as a scientist dared to ask, can thought move across space? Can the mind speak without sound? He never claimed to have all the answers, but he made it intellectually permissible to ask, even in Stalin's Russia. Some researchers claimed they could detect microwave emissions from the brain or observe unknown energy patterns around trained mediums. They also reported cases where test subjects, under intense focus, could affect simple machines, stopwatches, or cause sensors to spike. Whether or not these claims held up to Western scrutiny, they were taken seriously in the East. At the heart of Soviet parapsychology was the radical idea that the human brain is not just a receiver, but also a transmitter. This gave rise to the so-called black box theory. The brain emits unknown forms of bioradiation, perhaps torsion fields, scalar waves, or subtle energies not yet detected by mainstream physics. Some hypothesized these emissions could carry emotional or informational content, much like a radio signal, only more subtle and possibly non-local, not constrained by distance. These theories were considered fringe in the West, but in the Soviet system, where physics and biology often intermingled, they fueled decades of state-funded experimentation. Despite tight security, some evidence escaped. Experiments in Mental Suggestion by Leonid Vasiliev was published and even translated into English. It detailed protocols for long-distance telepathy under controlled conditions. It became a rare glimpse into Soviet APSI science. In 1970, The book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, by Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder, shocked Western audiences. Based on interviews and field visits, it documented Soviet interest in aura photography, biofield manipulation, brainwave entrainment, military psychic units. The West realized, perhaps too late, that the USSR had invested heavily in what they termed mind weapons. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it wasn't just KGB files that were declassified, so were decades of parapsychology research. What emerged was chilling. Dozens of PSI research facilities had existed. Hundreds of test subjects were trained in psychotronic protocols. Military planners took the findings seriously enough to incorporate mental influence strategies into psychological operations. And though many reports remain redacted or lost, what remains is undeniable. The Soviet Union did not treat the paranormal as pseudoscience. It treated it as a weapon. The Cold War was not just a race for nuclear arms or space domination. It was a race for the human mind. Beneath the radar of political treaties and scientific congresses, a quiet war unfolded in laboratories, bunkers, and intelligence agencies. A war fought not with bullets, but with thoughts. In the Soviet Union, parapsychology had been reborn, not as mysticism, but as military science. The question haunting generals on both sides of the Iron Curtain was simple. What if, in a cramped apartment in Leningrad, a woman named Nina Kulagina was making metal balls roll and matchsticks spin without laying a finger on them? She wasn't a trained magician or a media personality. She was a former Red Army radio operator, a war widow, and, according to Soviet scientists, an authentic telekinetic. Her mind could be weaponized. Footage emerged in the 1960s. Kulagina, seated at a table, eyes squinting in intense concentration, slowly nudging small objects across a smooth surface. No strings, no fans, no visible trickery. Researchers from military labs and foreign delegations came to witness it. Some left unconvinced. Others left unsettled. "I felt my heart being pulled," said one observer. It was as if a magnetic field was being generated, not by a machine, but by her will. Doctors noted that after each session, Kulagina would be exhausted, sometimes needing medical attention. Her heart rate spiked, her pupils dilated. It was as if the energy was coming from within, but at a cost. Was it a trick of the eye? Or the first recorded glimpse of a new kind of force? While Kulagina moved matter, others tried to move thoughts. In one of the most ambitious telepathy experiments of the Cold War, Karl Nikolaev, a former stage actor turned parapsychologist, was placed in a sealed military bunker. Miles away, Vera Putina, a trained psychic, attempted to send him images, emotionally charged stimuli, like a burning house or a crying child. According to reports, Nikolaev was able to sketch or describe the images with uncanny accuracy, despite being shielded from all known forms of communication. In another variation, the sender was aboard a submarine under radio silence, yet the impressions still came through. To Western skeptics, this sounded absurd, but to the Soviet military, it could not be ignored. They feared the Americans were conducting similar research, and they were, under the CIA's Stargate project. And so, the Soviets doubled down, investing in psychotronic research centers, covert studies in brainwave interference, and efforts to develop mental influence technologies. Many of these experiments remain controversial. Skeptics argue that flaws in methodology, confirmation bias, or even staged performances taint the data. But even critics agree on one thing. The Soviet Union poured real resources into studying the paranormal, not out of belief, but out of fear that their enemies might weaponize it first. In the shadow of rockets and radar, an invisible war was fought, not for territory, but for consciousness. The Cold War's psychic arms race may not have yielded conclusive proof, but it left behind a chilling question. What if the next battlefield isn't outer space, but inner space? While missiles and spies defined the public face of the Cold War, a far more secretive arms race was being conducted behind laboratory doors. One that didn't aim to conquer terrain, but to penetrate the mind itself. By the late 1960s, the Soviet Union had established a network of top-secret psychotronics institutes, backed by military and KGB intelligence. These centers weren't the stuff of fiction. They were real facilities, equipped with sensitive instruments, trained psychics, and scientists tasked with exploring the unthinkable. Could the mind influence electronics? Could thoughts be transmitted across great distances, through bunkers, oceans, even into enemy command centers? Could trained operatives disrupt cognition or implant moods? Funded through classified channels, Soviet bioenergetics and psychotronics labs operated in major cities like Leningrad, Novosibirsk, and Moscow. Their focus: remote influence, disrupt enemy morale or decision-making without physical contact. ESP enhancement, improve battlefield awareness through mental perception. Biolocation, the ability to psychically locate hidden weapons, mines, or even missing persons. Subscribe now and keep exploring with us.